strength is purpose, not performance. That's the first habit I want to offer. And I want us to sit with that for a moment, not rush past it, because we live in a culture that is obsessed with outcomes, with optics, with how things look on the outside. We're told that being strong means being the best at something, the fastest, the loudest, the richest, the man who dominates the room, the man who wins. But here's the truth. That kind of strength is hollow if it isn't rooted in something deeper. Without purpose, performance becomes a mask. And over time, even the strongest looking man will find himself running on empty. Purpose gives strength its spine. It gives direction to power. Think of it this way. A man can be incredibly capable, high-achieving, competent, even admired, and still feel utterly lost. I've spoken to young men who are successful by every metric, good degrees, decent jobs, physically fit, confident in the way they carry themselves. But when I ask them what they're for, what they stand for, what animates them, what cause or conviction they're willing to struggle for, there's a pause. And in that pause is a quiet crisis. So this is where we begin. A strong man is a man who has answered that question, what am I for? Not what am I good at, not what do I want to win, but what do I serve? Purpose doesn't have to be grand or dramatic. It doesn't require a stage or a spotlight. Sometimes purpose is found in becoming a dependable father. Sometimes it's found in mastering a craft, building something with your hands, or mentoring someone who's a few steps behind you. Purpose is rarely glamorous, but it is always grounding. It's what keeps you going when no one's clapping. It's what makes sacrifice feel worthwhile. It's what turns struggle into growth. There's something else that happens when a man locks into purpose. He becomes harder to manipulate. Without purpose, you're at the mercy of trends, temptations, and distractions. You get pulled this way and that, trying to impress, trying to prove, trying to keep up. But when you're rooted in purpose, you become immovable in the best sense of the word. You know what you're building, and you're not rattled by every passing storm. That's real strength. And I want to say this clearly, especially for younger men. Your purpose doesn't need to be fully formed at 20 or 25. This isn't a one-time epiphany. It's a process. Purpose is often discovered in motion. You begin by showing up, by taking responsibility, by leaning into discomfort. You learn what matters to you, not by waiting for perfect clarity, but by committing to something, failing, adjusting, and trying again. The habit here is not perfection, it's pursuit. Pursuit will change you, because once you find even a glimmer of purpose, your standards rise. You start caring about how you use your time. You stop chasing the empty wins. You say no to things that used to tempt you because now you've got something better to say yes to. You stop looking around for affirmation and start looking forward toward your goal. You grow up. And that's not always easy because we live in a culture that offers young men endless reasons to stay passive, distracted, and directionless. But here's what I've seen again and again. Once a man discovers even a thread of purpose and starts to pull on it, the kind that doesn't need to shout, let me give you a very simple contrast. One man goes to the gym, works out every day, looks like a statue, but he's aimless. He doesn't know who he is. His relationships are shallow. His work feels meaningless. Another man might not look as impressive on the outside, but he shows up for his kids. He mentors boys in his neighborhood. He's building something slowly with patience and grit. Which one is the strong man? We've got to stop confusing visibility with value. Not all strength can be measured on a screen or in a salary. Strength of character, strength of will, strength of vision, those take time to build, and they often grow quietly. Purpose is the seed from which all those other forms of strength emerge. Without it, you're building on sand. So if you want to grow stronger, don't just ask how to get better at something, ask why you're doing it in the first place. Don't just train harder, train with intention. Don't just work more, work toward something. Because when you have purpose, your performance becomes more than ego. It becomes service, it becomes legacy, it becomes meaning. That's where strength begins. Too often we tell our sons to man up, when what we really mean is shut down. We're teaching them, consciously or not, that strength is silence, that composure means concealment, and that feeling is somehow at odds with being a man. But the truth is, one of the most courageous things a man can do is feel, and feel openly, responsibly. When we suppress what we feel, We don't make it disappear, we simply bury it deeper, where it tends to resurface in far less constructive ways. Anger, apathy, addiction, these are often the downstream effects of emotional illiteracy. The world doesn't need more men who bottle everything up and then erupt. It needs men who are strong enough to own what's going on inside them without shame or fear. And this isn't about becoming emotionally indulgent or performatively vulnerable. It's not about standing on a stage and pouring out your soul for applause. It's about integrity, emotional integrity, the capacity to be aligned internally and externally, to have your inner life and outer expression match. That kind of alignment is where true strength lives. Because when a man is emotionally aligned, he doesn't just react, he responds. He doesn't hide behind bravado or bluntness. He speaks with clarity and conviction. There's a myth that men are naturally less emotional. But any parent of a young boy will tell you that's simply not true. Boys are deeply emotional. The difference is in how we shape those emotions over time. We reward toughness, stoicism, competitiveness. And there's value in all of those in the right context. But when toughness becomes numbness, when stoicism becomes silence, and when competition becomes isolation, something goes very wrong. We strip boys of their humanity in the name of making them strong. And then we wonder why they grow into men who don't know how to ask for help, how to grieve, or how to love fully. Now, let me be clear. This isn't about softening men. It's about strengthening them by giving them access to the full range of their emotional toolkit. You cannot lead a family, a team, or a community if you're emotionally unavailable. You cannot form meaningful partnerships or raise emotionally healthy children if you're walled off from your own emotional world. Emotional strength is not about being overwhelmed by feelings. It's about being able to name them, regulate them, and communicate them. That's what sets apart the man who leads from the man who retreats. That's what builds resilience. And resilience, contrary to popular belief, is not just about pushing through. It's about knowing when to pause, when to process, and when to ask for support. A strong man can say, "I'm angry," without lashing out. He can say, "I'm afraid," without losing dignity. He can say, "I don't know," without losing authority. That's what emotional maturity looks like. And it's not just good for the man himself, it's good for the people around him. Because when men learn to manage their emotions well, they stop projecting them onto others. They stop passing down cycles of shame, silence, or aggression. They become the kind of men who raise sons who don't have to recover from their fathers, and daughters who grow up expecting emotional presence from the men in their lives. And look, this takes work. For many men, it means unlearning decades of conditioning. It means finding language for things they were taught not to speak about. It means sitting in discomfort instead of numbing it with distraction. That's hard, that's vulnerable, but it's also incredibly brave. Some of the strongest men I know are the ones who have done that work. They've walked through grief, through failure, through deep personal reckoning, and they've come out not harder, but wiser, not colder, but clearer. That is the kind of manhood we need more of. Not men who pretend to be invincible, but men who are honest about what it costs to be whole. The irony is, when you ignore your emotional life, it controls you. But when you face it, name it, and understand it, you gain control. You don't become weaker by feeling, you become stronger by owning those feelings and acting from a grounded place. So when we talk about being a strong man, let's stop talking only about muscle or grit or achievement. Let's talk about emotional strength, the quiet, steady power of a man who knows himself and tells the truth about what he feels. That's what makes a strong man unshakable. A strong man understands that life is not about claiming his rights before he has shouldered his responsibilities. In fact, it's the very act of taking responsibility, willingly, deliberately, and with integrity, that turns a boy into a man. We live in a culture that has become increasingly obsessed with the language of entitlement. What I deserve, what I'm owed, what society should give me. But this mindset is a trap. It encourages passivity, resentment, and ultimately a kind of helplessness that is the very opposite of strength. True strength, real masculine maturity begins with the quiet, often unseen decision to take on weight. Not for applause, not for power, but because something or someone depends on you. That might be your family. It might be your work. It might be your own potential, waiting to be developed. Whatever it is, responsibility is the proving ground. It's where character is formed, where discipline is refined, and where real manhood begins to emerge. I often say to young men, before you ask for influence, ask yourself what you're willing to carry. Before you assert your identity, ask what you're contributing. That shift from what do I get to what do I give is one of the most fundamental transformations a man can undergo. It reorients the soul away from self-interest towards service. And in that shift, a deeper kind of strength is born, not the strength of domination, but of dedication. Now, responsibility isn't glamorous. It often looks like showing up when you don't feel like it, doing the hard thing because it's the right thing, working late when you'd rather relax, listening with patience when you'd rather speak, apologizing first, even when your pride flares. These are the daily acts of responsibility that don't make headlines, but they build something far more important: trust, stability, and moral authority. In the quiet steadiness of those actions, men build the foundations of lives that others can rely on. There's an old saying, a man is someone others can count on. It sounds simple, but think about it. In a time when flakiness is normalized, when commitment is often seen as optional, being dependable is a form of rebellion. And yet, it's the cornerstone of strength. If people can't count on you, it doesn't matter how gifted you are, how smart you are, how many followers you have, because strength without responsibility is just potential, and potential alone doesn't change lives. Taking responsibility also means taking ownership, not just of your duties, but of your failures. A strong man doesn't pass blame or make excuses. And when he gets it wrong, he owns it, not because he enjoys shame, but because he understands that growth depends on truth. There's a certain courage in standing up and saying, that was on me. I'll do better. That moment, however small, can mark the difference between a man who's still hiding behind his ego and a man who is truly becoming grounded. One of the things we need to reclaim is the idea that responsibility is not a burden, it's a gift. It's what gives life structure, meaning, and direction. It keeps us anchored when things are uncertain. It calls us upward when we feel like retreating. And most of all, it connects us to others. Responsibility is always relational. You take responsibility for something or for someone. It pulls you out of the orbit of self and orients you toward the world. Some of the most broken men I've encountered aren't the ones who failed. They're the ones who never took responsibility for anything in the first place, because when you refuse responsibility, you remain untethered, you drift. And when you drift, life begins to feel hollow. Paradoxically, it's often when a man commits to something difficult, fatherhood, mentorship, leadership, that he begins to feel fully alive. Strength grows under pressure. That's not a cliche, it's a truth written into our biology, our psychology, and our souls. And it's important to say this, no one will hand you responsibility. You have to claim it. It's not something that arrives with age or status. It's a choice, a mindset, a posture. Some of the most responsible men I've met are in their 20s. Some of the least responsible are well into middle age. Responsibility isn't about years lived. It's about decisions made. If you want to become a strong man, don't wait for the world to give you permission. Look around and ask, what needs doing? What gap can I fill? Who needs me to show up today? Not perfectly, but faithfully. That's where your strength begins, right there, in the daily choice to carry what matters, even when no one is watching. That's the kind of man the world is quietly crying out for. Not the loudest, not the flashiest, but the one who can be counted on when it really matters. The fourth habit of a strong man is this: seek growth, not comfort. It's a subtle distinction, but a vital one. We live in a time when comfort is constantly marketed to us as the ultimate goal. Comfort in work, comfort in relationships, comfort in our routines. We've built entire industries around making life easier, more convenient, more frictionless. And yet, in the midst of this ease, so many men find themselves restless, numb, and uncertain. That's because comfort, when pursued for its own sake, becomes a kind of trap. It dulls the edge. It makes us passive. And over time, it weakens us. Strong men don't avoid challenge. They move toward it, not recklessly, not out of a need to prove something, but because they understand that growth only happens when we stretch beyond what's familiar. There's a profound truth here. The areas of your life that are most meaningful, your career, your relationships, your character, these only develop when you're willing to do the hard things. There is no shortcut, no hack, no way around the slow, deliberate work of becoming, and often that work begins in discomfort. Discipline is a kind of rebellion against that soft pull toward ease. Waking up early when you'd rather sleep in. Speaking up when it would be easier to stay silent. Saying no when your impulses are a screaming yes. These aren't just acts of willpower, they're acts of identity. Every time you choose discipline over indulgence, you're casting a vote for the man you're becoming. You're reinforcing a structure, an internal architecture that says, I don't just drift, I direct. Think about a man who's physically strong. That didn't happen by accident. It took hours in the gym, days when the body ached, moments when quitting felt justified, and yet he kept showing up. Now apply that same principle to your emotional strength, your intellectual stamina, your moral resilience. All of these require training. They require consistent, often unseen effort. That's the real work of masculinity, not chasing dominance, but cultivating depth. Growth, of course, is not glamorous. It often feels awkward. It's filled with uncertainty. There's failure involved. But failure is not the opposite of strength. It's a necessary part of it. If you're not failing sometimes, you're probably not risking enough. And if you're not risking, you're not growing. The man who seeks growth leans into these uncomfortable places. He knows that in the process of testing his limits, he'll discover new capacities. There's also a misconception that growth is something we achieve in isolation, that the strong man climbs the mountain alone. But strength isn't about isolation, it's about integration. It's about being part of something larger than yourself. And so one of the most powerful ways a man can grow is through responsibility. When you commit to something, a project, a cause, a relationship, you create the conditions for growth. It becomes no longer about your comfort, but about what you're building. Responsibility pulls you upward. That's why rites of passage were so central in many cultures. They weren't just symbolic ceremonies. They were structured discomfort. They were meant to separate the boy from the man, to mark the moment when ease was no longer the standard. Today, we've lost many of those rites, but the principle remains. Growth demands that we leave behind the safety of what we know. It demands courage, not just to act, but to endure. Endure the unknown, endure the silence, endure the weight. And here's the deeper truth. Growth isn't always visible. The world celebrates the man who wins the race, who closes the deal, who stands on the stage. But strength is also forged in private, in the decisions no one sees, the disciplines no one applauds. The strong man doesn't need constant affirmation because he understands that the most important audience is internal. He asks himself, am I growing? Am I moving forward? Am I being stretched? And if the answer is yes, he knows he's on the right path. Comfort will always offer itself as an easier alternative. But the man who chases comfort eventually finds himself bored, bitter, or broken. Because comfort is static, and masculinity, true, grounded masculinity, is dynamic. It grows, it adapts, it matures. And that only happens through effort. The strong man doesn't avoid resistance. He trains under it. He sees discomfort not as an enemy, but as a signal. This is where I need to go. So if you want to become strong, not just in body, but in mind, spirit, and presence, then lean into challenge. Choose the harder path when it matters. Seek the stretch. And remember, growth rarely feels good in the moment, but over time, it becomes the source of your strength, your confidence, and your clarity. Because boys chase ease, men pursue challenge. One of the greatest misconceptions about strength, especially for men, is the idea that it must be carried alone. We've cultivated this myth of the lone wolf, the self-sufficient man who doesn't need anyone, who goes it alone and never asks for help. But this image, though seductive in its simplicity, is fundamentally flawed. It misunderstands what strength actually is. Real strength doesn't isolate, it connects. When men cut themselves off from meaningful male relationships, they don't just lose companionship, they lose a crucial source of perspective, accountability, and even identity. It's easy to believe that standing on your own is what defines maturity, but the truth is that we're not meant to be self-contained systems. We grow stronger through community, not in spite of it. We know from both data and lived experience that loneliness among men is a serious and growing issue. Many adult men report having few, if any, close friends. And what's even more concerning is that many don't even realize they're missing anything until they hit a crisis point. The job is lost, a relationship falls apart, a parent passes, and suddenly there's no one to call. The silence is deafening. That's not strength, that's fragility dressed up in stoicism. We need to reclaim the idea of brotherhood, and I use that word deliberately, not just friendship, not just networking or support group, but brotherhood, something rooted in mutual respect, shared values, and the willingness to show up for each other consistently. A brother doesn't just show up when it's easy, he's there when it's hard. He tells you the truth, not just what you want to hear. And you do the same for him. It's not sentimental, it's serious, and it's deeply necessary. Too often, men's relationships get sidelined by career ambition, family responsibilities, or simply the erosion of habit. We don't calendar time for each other. We don't prioritize real conversation. We let busyness become an excuse for emotional distance. And before we know it, the only people we really speak to are colleagues, a partner, maybe our kids. And even then, the conversations are often transactional. What's needed? What's urgent? What's next? But not what matters. And here's the paradox. Most men want these connections. They want to be understood, to share the burdens they carry, to hear that they're not alone in the doubts and pressures they face. But vulnerability without invitation feels risky. That's why someone has to go first. Someone has to break the silence. And that's what strong men do. They take that risk. They go first, not because it's safe, but because it's right. When we talk about strength, we often think about what you can lift. But I want to talk about who you can carry and who carries you. Brotherhood is the place where men hold each other up, call each other higher, and make each other better. It's not soft. It's not sentimental, it's steel sharpening steel. And without it, men can drift into apathy, into anger, into addiction, into despair. Not because they're weak, but because no one can withstand the pressures of life entirely alone. You don't have to wait for some crisis to realize you need male connection. You can start now, intentionally. Make that call, set the time, get coffee, join something, build something. Start small if you need to. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It just needs to be real. And when you're with other men, resist the urge to keep everything surface level. Go one layer deeper. Ask how someone's really doing. Share something honest about your own life. Create the kind of space where strength and struggle can coexist. Some of the most defining moments in a man's life don't happen in front of crowds or during big achievements. They happen in quiet conversations, in long drives, in shared meals, in late night talks with a friend who doesn't flinch when you tell the truth. Those are the moments that remind you who you are and what you're capable of. Those are the moments that form the backbone of a strong man's life. So if you're serious about becoming stronger, not just in body, but in character, you need men around you who challenge you, support you, and walk with you. You need brotherhood, not as an accessory to your strength, but as an essential part of it. Because in the end, strength isn't measured by how alone you can stand, but by how deeply you're willing to connect. A strong man invests in the next generation. And I don't just mean in a theoretical sense or as a vague nod to legacy. I mean this in the most practical, immediate, and personal way possible. A strong man doesn't hoard his wisdom or protect his experience like a trade secret. He passes it on, he mentors, he fathers, he builds. And this isn't about ego. It's not about trying to create a clone of yourself or asserting authority. It's about recognizing that real strength multiplies. It doesn't isolate. When we invest in the next generation, we create a ripple effect of strength that outlives us. That's the only kind of strength that matters in the long run. Too often today, men are encouraged to focus inward. Self-help, self-growth, self-optimization. And while that has its place, because you can't give what you don't have, it can also become a trap. We can get stuck in the loop of becoming better men while forgetting why we're doing it in the first place. Growth without contribution is just vanity. Strength that ends with you is sterile. There's a quiet dignity in giving your time to someone younger, someone less experienced. Whether it's your own child or a young man who never had a father figure, stepping into that role requires strength, patience, and humility. And it's hard. Let's not pretend otherwise. It's far easier to sit back and critique the next generation than to engage with them. It's easier to say kids these days don't get it than to sit down with one of them and say, tell me what you're struggling with. One requires cynicism, the other requires courage. You see, boys don't become men automatically. Masculinity isn't something that happens just because you hit a certain age. It's something that has to be taught, shown, modeled. And those who've wrestled through manhood, who've failed and grown and gotten back up, don't take on that responsibility, then who will? TikTok, the algorithm, the next celebrity meltdown disguised as masculinity. We owe them better. And more importantly, we need them to be better. Because here's the truth. When men stop investing in boys, we lose something critical in the social fabric. We lose wisdom transfer. We lose relational continuity, and we lose that deeply human process of apprenticeship, where character is shaped not just through lectures, but through lived proximity. Boys, watch how you hold yourself in hard moments. They listen more closely than you think when you admit a mistake. They're paying attention not to how perfect you are, but to how consistent you are. One of the most radical things a man can do today is show up for someone younger without expecting anything in return. No applause, no credit, just presence, just guidance. And you don't need to be perfect to do it. You just need to be a few steps ahead and willing to walk back and help someone else climb. This is what true masculinity looks like in action. It's generative, it creates, it builds, it sacrifices in the short term so that others can rise in the long term. And it doesn't happen in grand speeches or viral videos. It happens in quiet conversations. It happens in weekend meetups, in difficult, sometimes awkward moments where you choose to stay present rather than disengage. This is fatherhood, of course, but it's also mentorship, coaching, sponsorship, teaching. Any man, regardless of his biological status, can be a father in the broader cultural sense. We need more men who see that as their calling. Because the alternative is a vacuum, and vacuums get filled, often by the worst influences. So here's the challenge. Who are you raising up? Who are you pouring into? Who are you helping to stand taller, think clearer, walk straighter? And if you don't have an answer yet, that's okay.